There's more stuff I want to cover, but let's keep the intricacies for a full review.
Didn't think I'd follow up on that statement, huh? Well, here we are again, as this game continues to be a train wreck that you can't help but look towards. However, most of the criticisms of the game are surface level, the main stuff that makes everyone mad without looking deeper into the problems. While the PvE cancellation and horrific monetization are already unforgivable, they only distract from the actual deeper core issues the game has. Not to say the game isn't completely devoid of value, though, because if I hated this game, I wouldn't be here discussing it now, would I? Let's start with something positive to start out, as I think the gunplay is a nice breath of fresh air. Gunplay is one of those important pillars of any FPS game, and thankfully that is something that Overwatch does well. A lot of games fall to the gameplay loop of either standing still or aiming down sights to aim accurately, and Overwatch diverges from this expected form of gunplay by having no movement inaccuracy or hipfire penalty. This results in the gameplay being more movement-oriented, resulting in more dynamic gunfights. The TTK is also higher in 1v1 situations, making consistent aim a more important skill to have. The guns are also mostly unique for each other, providing a great variety that will have something for everyone. A lot of the guns also have alternative fires, a feature that is severely underutilized and very nice to see in a modern shooter. But this is just one of the core pillars of an FPS game. What's the movement like? If I had to describe Overwatch's movement with one word, it would be smooth. Everything is completely responsive, every movement ability behaves almost the same every time, and there's no real physics shenanigans to get in the way, outside of some basic blast jumping. This is an appeal of the game that many people like, but here's the thing. I'm not one of these people. I personally like it when the movement in the game is more tied to the physics and when there's a real sense of momentum, but with Overwatch, a lot of the movement can feel weightless and uninteresting. The strafe is also instant, which again feels smooth and polished, but can hinder how aiming feels due to the enemy being able to turn on a dime and effortlessly draw off your aim. While sure, it may be nice to be not confined by the laws of physics and instantly move in another direction, you must consider that this is a multiplayer game, and there's going to be another person on the side of every interaction. For a person shooting at the enemy, the instant strafe will not feel good at all and thus make it less satisfying to engage in the most integral pillar of gameplay. Is it objectively bad game design? No. Does it completely ruin the gunplay? Of course not. But this feat of instant player gratification resulting in the enemy player having less fun will continue to be a feat with Overwatch's gameplay mechanics. For one final usual pillar of FPS game design, let's look at the maps and modes. In Overwatch, it's clear that map design wasn't too much of a high priority, as much as the design of the maps is to make sure that they are intuitive rather than interesting. A lot of the maps you can easily draw a straight line through and make sure there's no possible way you can get lost in them, which if that was the intention, then that's good on them. Whenever I was playing TF2 for the first time, there were plenty of times I ended up going the wrong way on payload maps. There's still a bit of map knowledge requirement with certain health packs, but a lot of Overwatch's maps are simplistic. Whether you like this or not is my personal preference. I personally like more complex maps with more dynamic designs, but I can understand this decision, like the smooth movement. Unlike the strafe, this doesn't really affect active enjoyment, and a good portion of the maps are well enough designed. However, some maps really show some problems, namely the payload maps. The main problem is that they have too much open space, making fighting snipers hellish, and this problem has been exasperated by a new 5v5 format, but I'll get to that later. Speaking of payload, the main three game modes of King of the Hill, Payload, and Payload with an extra step function well. King of the Hill is the best one, with Hybrid and Payload sharing a pacing problem. With how Overwatch's pacing and team fights go, usually people won't want to push the Payload because, to put it simply, there's a whole lot of nothing happening in that period. The Payload usually doesn't move fast enough for the periods of pushing to not feel drawn out, and there's no visible reward for going on the Payload. Sure, there's a slight amount of healing, but we've already got 2 healers that are going to be readily available while pushing it, and also do way more healing. Another thing to note that there's no feedback for being healed by the Payload, further disincentivizing people to push an objective in this objective-based game. Take TF2 for example as a counterpoint. It gives you active points for pushing the Payload, and there's also a clear response when you get healed by the Payload, and also regenerate ammo. As for the 2 new modes added in Overwatch 2, I can't comment on Flashpoint yet because I haven't played it enough. However, push is straight up a war crime. The game is usually decided by the first team fight. There's the same pacing problems as Payload, and there's way too much walking. because this is why we played Overwatch, to take a hike. Doesn't Blizzard know its own player base, that they play Overwatch because they desperately want to stay away from grass? All this I just discussed, however, isn't the focus of Overwatch. This is a hero shooter after all, so let's talk about the heroes of the game. In Overwatch, the heroes are divided into 3 main roles of tank, support, and DPS. Tank usually has higher health, damage mitigation abilities, stuns, and a bigger hitbox. DPS is smaller with offensive abilities and more reliable weapons, and supports are the heroes with passive regeneration, usually an ability to get them out of a bad situation. These aren't always hard rules, but this is what's expected from the 3 classes. Most of these classes are fun to play as they have unique playstyles, with there being at least one playstyle for one person. However, a lot of these characters seem like they funnel you into how they're supposed to be played rather than giving you leeway to forge your own playstyle. This is because the overt simplicity of a lot of the classes, which is good for easing players into the experience, but it also takes out a lot of potential depth and replayability from the game. I like playing Pharah, but she's incredibly linear, and the main reason I play her is because she's already like another playstyle I like for a different game. The characters are good fun, but you can't really dive deep into most of them because they're shallow. This is why the game has probably focused on adding more characters as the game's lifespan continues to go on. But then again, that's also every other hero shooter on the market. Something else to note about general hero design is a lot of characters are simply aggravating to fight against. The stun mechanic, of course, has been beaten to death, but one-shots are becoming more of a problem by the day, especially since 5v5 has removed the tank to deal with the snipers. However, the one abilities that really grind my gear is instant escapes or get out of jail free cards, which is any ability that basically removes your ability to finish off a kill. Wanted to punish that Reaper for bad positioning? Nope, you can't. Saw him where I used Fate at a dumb time and want to get a kill? That cooldown regenerates too fast, so too bad. About to finish that Sojourn? You'd think that the kill is guaranteed, but the enemy team has a life leader, so all your work now means nothing. These are only a few examples, as the game has moved away from trying to annoy us with stuns, and instead trying to annoy us by denying our kills. Again, the game design seems to ignore that this isn't a single player game and decides to disregard the fact that there's another person to these interactions. Is this too big of a problem? Not necessarily. Guilty Gear's Strive is filled with absolute chicanery, yet I still love the game. However, there's one more part of the hero design that I still have a problem with, as do many people. Hero switching and countering. Now, character counters aren't necessarily a problem, as they exist in basically any character-based game. But in Overwatch, the character counters aren't ones that give you a slight edge of a person that's annoying you, but rather one to basically force the other guy to switch off. There are exceptions, but if I had a nickel every time the entire enemy team basically made it unplayable for me to go Pharah, I'd be able to buy out Activision Blizzard so I can make a good game. With this hero switching design, it can sometimes feel like you're less playing a shooter and more of rock, paper, scissors with extra steps. But enough about general design. I'd like to delve deeper into each of the 3 roles, and the main problem of each of them. First, let's start with tank. The tank role is the big beefy team leader that has damage mitigation abilities and CC to interrupt the opponent. Has historically been a struggle to properly balance or get people to play it. This is why in Overwatch 2, they decided to remove one of the tanks and make the remaining one a bit beefier. On paper, it makes sense to compensate for the lack of another tank, but in practice, this causes a ton of problems. First, it's all too common to feel like you're shooting a brick wall when going up against another tank, because while we may be able to kill a DPS in time before the heals pour in, with a tank every team will be alerted to the tank being in danger and you won't be able to kill him at times. This situation is even more common when playing as another tank, meaning you're often in the situation of being unable to die, but also unable to kill. You'll draw in all the fire as a tank, meaning you'll need supports to constantly back you up, meaning that all of the damage that you take either becomes insignificant or obscene. Sure, the tank role does provide a ton of value in being able to block a ton of damage and make space, but that isn't immediately satisfying as simply dealing or healing back damage. This also leads to you being counterpicked a lot more as tank due to your importance. So if there was a tank you really want to play as, too bad. More thing about the tank role is that damaging or healing them doesn't build as much ult charge, and they're more knockback resistance. The knockback resistance is good, as it plays into the role of taking space and it's immediately apparent that you're not getting knocked around as much. But the ult charge reduction is incredibly insignificant as people just shoot the tank anyways and you can't really feel like the enemy is getting less ult charge. But hey, you still got the power of being team leader, which still does make tank a powerful role, which the next one has the exact opposite problem. You see the screenshot right here? If you showed it to someone before any news of Overwatch 2 surfaced, they think you would have fabricated it. But why the fall of grace of DPS? First, let's look at the passive ability they got. Every role got a new passive. We already covered tank, but DPS got the short end of the stick. The DPS passive used to be great. At first, it was a flat movement increase, and then it was changed to retain some ult charge upon swap. But then that became a passive for everyone, so they changed it again to gain faster reload and movement speed upon elimination. This once again was too broken, so they changed it again to only reload. Not only is it just weaker than the other passives, but some DPS characters can't even reload like Hanzo. But this is fine, passives aren't everything. However, how much value provided is. With DPS, your job is to deal damage and secure kills, hence the name. Heroes in this category are the most diverse in the game, hence the previous popularity of the role. However, despite this, the DPS characters feel weak mainly because of power creep. Tanks can take a lot more damage and heroes have been buffed, however, DPS characters have not caught up to this power level. Additionally, due to mobility creep, it's a lot harder to secure kills any character in hit scan or a one-shot character, hence the prevalence of the previous two. This is further amplified by how many get-out-of-jail-free cards there are. DPS heroes aren't necessarily bad or unfun, however it's proven that they've gotten the short end of the stick. And most of these problems are rooted in one role: support. You remember earlier how I said that each role has a main problem? I lied. Because support doesn't have a problem, rather it is the problem. Nearly every problem I listened to earlier sections can be traced back to support. Tanks feel like they're both made of paper and impossible to kill. Because supports have a greater healing output, you're in a limbo of combined damage feeling incredibly high, but supports can easily out-heal a single DPS. DPS feels weak. Once again, increased healing makes your job harder as a solo DPS. Off the mobility creep, in many ways the healer can save another person for basically free. What's that? You want to focus on the healers first instead? Well, guess what? Almost all of their free escape abilities apply to them too, and they have a passive healing ability, so have fun trying to kill them. Did I mention the passive? If DPS drew the short straw, healers won the lottery. Not only does a passive healing make healers hard to kill, but it also makes them have less reason to use their healing abilities on themselves, providing more value automatically. Another thing to note is the trend to support characters being able to serve as semi-DPS characters, which is prominent with Alari and another character that's going to get their own section. Even with Lifeweaver, a character that's known for having worse damage than the other support heroes, I'm still doing okay damage. And when you give a class good sustain, good damage, and the exclusive ability to reliably heal, you've got a busted role on your hand. And even with all of this, people still don't like playing support, or at least the average player. Generally, you're mostly tied to your team's positioning to heal them and don't have much agency. Tank also has this problem to an extent, hence the low pick rate in Overwatch 1 and the removal of tank in Overwatch 2. But it doesn't matter if support and tank are the strongest or weakest, people are still going to find DPS the most fun because they have the most agency to position themselves. However, there's one more piece of this hero design puzzle, and that's the ultimate abilities. Ults have always been a contentious part of Overwatch's design, and that's for a few reasons. The first reason is their sheer power, as it's a common meme that pressing Q means you win the team fight. This feels great when you do it, but once again, Overwatch forgets it's a multiplayer game, getting Q pressed on feels like there's nothing you can do. Granted, there are ways to counter ultimates, but it's usually tied to specific abilities on specific characters and being able to track the enemy down and know when they're going to use their ultimate. Good luck pulling that off in a solo queue environment. In fact, you can't exactly track when an ultimate can be used, as it's dependent on player performance. I like this as an idea of needing to be active to get your strongest ability, however you still often have it so every player gets an ult every round. Even if you want a cheap power fantasy, it is considered having more of something makes it less special, and when everyone's super, nobody is. If all of this wasn't annoying enough, the strongest ults in the game are once again for support. Most of the time, they are easy to use team states that provide automatic value and negate even the strongest ultimates in the game. This further exacerbates the issue of damage being too high so heals are super strong to compensate, which I shouldn't even have to explain how this continues to stack on to the common problems of the game. Speaking of more common problems, the RPS aspect of the game used to have some risk in Overwatch 1, but in Overwatch 2, there's a passive that allows you to retain ult charge on switching, making the game becomes more of complicated RPS than before. However, there's one more game aspect that needs to be discussed, and that's pacing. When you think of pacing, you usually think of a story, but it also applies with games. As I've previously said, if you have too much big stuff going on, it feels less special, but you don't want to bore your audience either. With Overwatch, it has a problem of the boring moments being too uneventful and the exciting moments being too much. When you're walking to the enemy team, that's expected to not be too exciting, and that's fine. However, when you've won the objective, you're not doing anything interesting. With other games, once you push up, it usually results in preparing for the next fight by positioning, but in Overwatch, the map design doesn't lend itself too well for this. This is the reason why nobody wants to play the payload, as it's both uneventful and unrewarding. Often, the payload will be too slow to catch up with when the next team fight is happening, meaning you're either not winning or you're sacrificing your participation in the current fight to play the game optimally. But when the fight does happen, it either results in people getting melted in a one-sided stomp or a fight that drags on for too long, as you're just wondering when it's going to end. In this clip, I die, but due to one teammate being alive, I teleport back and end up continuing the battle. Why does this happen? Once again, support. Support heroes can often just completely undo mistakes and easily prolong the battle, making it seem like a Sisyphean task to keep the enemy team in the grave. Because while I'm usually a fan of a high time to kill game, Overwatch immediately reminds me of how too much sustainability can result in an absolute nightmare. And combine this sustainability with the instant strafe, and the gunplay goes from a nice breath of fresh air to pain. Because you let the enemy off your crosshair for just a second, everything you did will no longer matter. Look at this clip of me barely managing to kill a Bastion, only to be one shot by Hanzo, and the Bastion being immediately revived. Because what are you even playing the game for? Why do you even try to play? What's the point? Why am I even here? Why am I even here? Why do I care? I'm a TF2 player, I've always hated this game, so why do I keep discussing it? Whenever I criticize Overwatch, I kind of feel bad because it seems like the game can't catch a break. You constantly see people line up to make pot shots at the game every time Blizzard seems to mess up, and I'm not a big fan of bandwagons. Because at one point, Overwatch was everywhere, I had a ton of critical acclaim and everyone seemed to love it. But eventually the tide has turned, and it seemed like suddenly the whole world was against it. It was Overwatch bad this, Overwatch bad that, and the cycle continues until now. And I always feel bad for the game because this is a game I should love. Most of the character designs are great. The gameplay can sometimes be an absolute blast, yet it's clear someone cared about the game. There are cries of a great game in there, yet every time I continue to play, it sours. The cracks in the foundation start to show, and I start around why I was one of people constantly hating on the game. While Overwatch has great ideas, it squanders almost every one of them. There are some interesting lore and characters out, it just never utilized them properly. There are some fun battles to be had, it's just buried underneath a mess of aggravating abilities. What makes this even worse is the developer's seemingly apathetic approach to all of this criticism. Sure, I know some might care about these issues, but most of the time I see them talk like they're a bunch of politicians, trying to pause that everything's fine when it really isn't. It's like seeing someone with top potential refuse to try to do anything of note and just do the bare minimum, but even then, Blizzard will continue to underdeliver. There are more problems to note, but I'm not going to discuss them. I'm not going to criticize the monetization, because you already know it's bad. I'm not going to criticize the PvE, because I'm not paying $15 for something that most players have agreed is mediocre. I'm not going to criticize the story, because they already did that. I'm not going to criticize the balance, because that's for the pro players to do, as I'm more focused on game flow and game feel. I'm not going to criticize the community members and content creators that continue to defend this mediocrity, because the people that need to hear it the most won't listen. What I am going to do instead is look at the one final piece of Overwatch 2 that represents everything wrong with it. One hero that's a monument to Blizzard's sins. This hero is Kiriko. Nearly everything about Kiriko is a reminder of how Blizzard has fallen off, especially with Overwatch. First, let's look at her design. When you look at it compared to other heroes, it looks especially bland. It's less of something creative you would see from Overwatch like Ramatra, and rather she looks like a Valorant character. Her character itself is just all over the place, as in her cinematics she acts like a Disney princess, but in the game she's just incredibly obnoxious, creating two personalities that clash with each other. And don't even get me started on the recent age fiasco, as that's been covered enough. But let's talk about gameplay. Kiriko's heals are good, but her damage is just as good, as it can potentially 2-tap any light class in the game, and it's not too hard to aim to kunai's. And then there's the abilities. First, you have Swift Step. which allows her to teleport to any teammate in a good range, giving her the ability to basically escape any fight or bad situation. And then there's Suzu, which does everything. About to die, Suzu. Teammate's about to die, Suzu. Debuffs, Suzu. Teammate's stunned, Suzu. About to get hit with an ultimate, Suzu. Need to pay your bills, Suzu. Getting cancelled on Twitter, Suzu. Need to pay your rent, Suzu. Government is taking over, Suzu. This ability is too strong, and no matter how much Blizzard tries to nerf it, the sheer power of an ability that can make any of our team invincible along with healing is always going to be a broken ability. The only way you can counter this ability is to bait out along with her other two escape tools, and then try to kill a class that can do 120 damage per hit and has self-regen. Or you can just use a sniper to one-shot her. Have I emphasized enough why people are using snipers more and more? Speaking of that second escape tool, she can also wall climb because Blizzard hates you in particular. And if that wasn't enough to make her a broken hero, she has an incredibly good ultimate to top it off. Kitsune Rush makes it so that everyone can do everything faster, which is integral in a game like Overwatch. More damage, more heals, lower cooldown. If it is used correctly, then the enemy team doesn't stand a chance. Overall, Kiriko is one of those annoying characters to go up against due to the sheer number of ways you can cheat death while still having good damage to duel with. But Kiriko doesn't just represent pros of story or gameplay, she's emblematic of the monetization of the game. And the very first battle pass, Kiriko is locked for whoever didn't pay up or had Overwatch 1 before. This resulted in a semi-pay-to-win effect, as she was still incredibly powerful and met at top levels of play, meaning you needed her for certain matchups. And we certainly aren't forgetting the Witch Kiriko fiasco in the Halloween event. And on top of this, she ended up getting Babe banished to the Shadow Realm because of a glitch involving her teleport and May's Ice Wall, exposing the lack of polish Overwatch 2 had. And there are still bugs involving her teleport. Because of course the first character Overwatch 2 released would be the owner of what path the game would go down. And with that, I'm done. Remember earlier when I said that sometimes I feel a bit too harsh on Overwatch? I'd like to recontextualize this, because nearly every time I expected the bare minimum, Overwatch managed to disappoint me. It just becomes clear over time that the priorities of Blizzard are so disconnected from their own player base, let alone me. Hopefully this will give me some closure, because I've kept giving Overwatch a second chance, but every time it feels like nothing will change. If this final review that I can be truly satisfied, it's time to move on.
Oh, please don't wait for me, darling. Stay out on the coast.